Welcome to the intro to 2D game art. Today I'm going to be talking about several aspects of it, which includes pixel art. It would be 2D art in Sketchbook and many more things. And today I just want to run through the basics of what it means to be a digital artist when you are working on a game together, especially on a game jam. Now what I have open up here is a program called Sketchbook, and this is something that I usually use when I am doing 2D art, that is just in general anything that requires you to draw in 2D. And another option that you would have, and you might often choose actually, is pixel art. So today I'll be starting with pixel art and introducing you to a program, well actually it is a web application that is often what I use when doing 2D digital art. So that is this right here. This is called Pixel. And this is what it looks like when you start to create a new document. Now, this program, I don't think it requires you to make an account for it to work, but if it does, it's all free. So that's what it's going to be. On the left, you have icons that, several things that you might recognize from other programs. So the pen tool is something that you use to draw on the pixels, and they are just getting colored in one at a time. And you can, what it means when you're changing the size here is really how many pixels are colored in at the same time. So it could go up to 4 pixels right here, and this is what it looks like. The resolution could be changed if you go on the right hand side. You have several things that you can use, and I'll go into this later when we start working on stuff. And if you want it to be more detailed, usually you could go 64 by 64. And I hope that changed. Oh no, it hasn't. You have to click resize for it to change. And now everything seems much smaller. But I want to start off with just the 32 one and just make something really simple, a character that you might probably recognize. And I'm going to start with the vertical mirror pen because it's quite a symmetrical one. So I'm just going down and making a little ghost here. And that is pretty much the outline of it. This is everything you are required to have a character, or at least the start of it. And I'm going to go in and create a new palette where I'm going to choose whatever color I want to make this little ghost. So let's say the pink, and you click here to add new colors with the plus sign. And I'm going to say maybe a blue for the eyes, and a plain white, and just black. And I'm going to call this palette Ghost. There. So now you can easily go in and choose the colors without having to go onto the left side and choose from here every single time. This is especially helpful when you have a color palette that's a bit varied, especially if you are using shading. And I'm just going to go in and color this in with the fill tool. And I'm going to make the eyes. I think I'm going to use the vertical mirror pen next. One thing I usually avoid is making sure not to touch the edges whenever I'm creating things that are inside a face or a character. And then once I'm done with that, I can just give it some eyes. And yeah, that's pretty much the basics of making a little character here, some things that are pretty useful here, one that I really like to use is this button here, where if I want to change the eye color, for example, let's say I make them green, then I can just go ahead and both of the eyes are colored at the same time. And again, especially when you get into more complex images, this is really useful to just change the colors of the entire thing without having to go through or redraw. So that would be your little ghost that is done here. And we would like to export it maybe and send it off to the programmers so that they could use it into the game. You have the save option here to save it as a Piskel file or into your gallery, which I'll show you later. Or simply export it as, let's say, a selected frame, or we could have it as a sprite sheet. Now, for those that are unfamiliar with creating art for games, usually this is how you give the the programmers, all of the frames that you have in an animation. So actually, I think I'll show you that first. Here you have the timeline, you can call it, where you can duplicate a frame and then make changes to it without losing what you had previously. So if you go in here, oh, you guys can't see my screen. Alright, sorry about that. Can you see it now? That's really weird. Can you see it now? This is sad. Yes? Are people saying yes? Yay! Okay. All right. I guess I'll just restart everything then. Really sorry, guys. Okay, so now you should see that this is the program in which we can create pixel art, and it's called Piskel. And you can go into here, yeah, and just create a new sprite. So I'm just going to run through everything I've just said, except this time you can actually see what I am doing. On the left you have all the buttons that I was talking about, and on the right hand side there is the place where I had created my palette. To just redo that, I can just show you here. Let's choose 4 colors. 1, 2, 3. Okay, let's say 3. Now I'll call this RGB because I guess that's what it is. And you can switch between the palettes that you have over here. So, oh, I guess we have 2 of those. So yeah, now let's actually make the little ghost that I was talking about. And the character that it's supposed to be is just the one from Pac-Man, so I'll try and create that again. Oh, this is really wide this time, I guess. Okay, there are several things I want to fix, so to do that, I guess that's just an opportunity to use all these other wonderful tools that we have over here. This is the erase tool. And I think I want to make this part more curved, so I'll do this. good enough. There we go. I guess that is the ghost that we are working with. Filling it with the fill bucket tool and just drawing the eyes in now with the mirror tool, so it's nice and symmetrical. And then just adding in the whites of the eyes. And what I was explaining before about the this little button here is that you can just quickly change the eye color without having to redo everything. Oh, or do that instead. There we go. What is over here with the transform tools are the things that actually move your entire picture. So you could flip it, you could rotate it. You can also work with layers. So if you have several layers, you can clone something new to all of the frames that you can add over here. And this would be where you would have your animation timeline, or where you would draw your character in different perspectives to make a sprite sheet. So what I'm going to do now is just make a simple blinking effect. So I'm just going in and taking all of this away. And now over here, you should see that it's blinking really, really fast. You can slow this down, and you can also go up to the top right and preview it. And now you should see what it would look like if this is implemented into the game itself. Sometimes you may not want to have just idle animations like this. It could be for several uses, but I think it's a great way of seeing especially the movements that you create for different characters. So what we can do now is go ahead and save it either to our gallery, so I can do that now and call it Ghost. And then I can download the sprite sheet itself. So if we go in here, this is all you'll get, and it's really, really small, but that's because these are actual pixels. So that's what it would look like. Or another thing you could do is just export one particular frame, and you can do that by just clicking selected frame export. And this should give you just one of them. If you need to redo something, update anything, that's usually a useful thing to do. So now I'm going to go ahead and show you some things that I have done for the previous game jam. And this is what the gallery would look like. And there are a bunch of things here that are going on, several things that I'll get into, because this is a type of game that I think implements several things and skills, I would say, that you would be required to do if you were to make the 2D art in a game. So I think the first thing that I'll show you are these deities here. So these are just designs of, a monster-like creature that the character would go and interact with, and they would be stationary within a certain location. So because they are stationary, but I want them to appear as living, what I've done is just create 2 frames and change several aspects of it to give the impression of movement. And this is a really quick way of giving the impression that something is alive or moving without spending too much time of animating every single frame. So I feel like that is a useful thing that you can do. And there are several elements that you can emulate by doing this. So running water, fire, and whatever else you would like to make. Another thing that I would like to show you is this character here. Now, the way that the the map itself looks like, yeah, let's just open it in Paint, is this. So with pixel art, you usually can create several different perspectives, and one of them that we used in the game that we've made is a grid-based type of thing where you would have different tiles, different tiles that would connect and then form the walls and the floors and give you the illusion that it's a sort of top-down perspective and a little angled as well. The specifics of all of this, you might recognize this as Unity. It is all up to the programmer or whoever, the group of programmers that would be in your team. I am not on the programming side at all, but I think that it is a good way of collaborating, and a tip I would give for 2D artists that are just starting out in game development would be to communicate a lot with whoever is the programmer in your team, because that would save you a lot of time in knowing the way that things are made and the things that you would require. So in this little space, I had to fit a character that would move around, and the protagonist that we had chosen was this little design over here. One little tip that I would like to note about making characters that are in this strange sort of top-down perspective is try and think of it first of all sideways, and then moving it into the perspective that you would want. So I'm just going to go into this one, and I'd like to say that at first I struggled with this myself as well. So the things that I found out and the things that really helped me, I'd just like to share right now by going into this. So you might notice that these perspective lines here that I've drawn are part of a layer, and it's also an example of how the layers work in Piskel. So they would highlight whatever you would have selected in the layers first, or you can move them up or move them down, whichever way. But I'm just going to go now into the characters themselves that we have. One thing that I would like to note, so the big thing that helped me, is thinking of the head size first before doing anything else with the character. And you might notice that whatever size this head is pretty much the same as the other one. The tool I'm using now is this shape selection tool. It doesn't really work with things that are diagonal, but thankfully all of this is connected perpendicularly. So I'll copy this and paste it here. So you can see that I've maintained the head size in pretty much the same way, but I've moved down the line, the forehead line right here. And that is pretty much the biggest change that you would like to make sure that you make, because everything else is pretty much trying to accommodate this change. One thing I've kept the same is probably the placement of the ears and the placement of the mouth. But that is because everything else has been brought down, so whatever is smooshed down will make up for everything else that you see in perspective. So how about we try and fix an animation that I've made for that jam. We had, what you might notice, especially when making art, is that you might not really have time to go into all of the details that you might want. So as long as you plan properly, you might end up with something that is a little more detailed than what I have over here. So what I ended up doing, this is supposed to be a walking cycle, so this is what it looks like. And you might notice that it doesn't really look like it's actually walking, it just looks like the leg bend just appears out of nowhere. So how about we try and fix that and then try and export it and see how that looks. One thing I'd like to note is that if you don't have a drawing tablet, then Piskel again is something that is really good to use. because in drawing in pixels you don't really need any smooth lines, everything is just squares. So how about we go and probably add a few more before we start. So I'm just going to double these and focus on the arms first. One thing that I was pretty reluctant about when working in pixels is really just bending anything that isn't square. Oh, there we go. So if I had this arm over here, then unless you change it to a 90-degree angle like this, it doesn't really look as good, at least in the head of whoever is making it. But I think the only thing that you need to do is make sure that the positioning of the hand itself is wherever it should be when it makes the arc. So whenever someone swings their arms, you have a little arc. I'll draw that in the second layer. And the rest of it should just be guessing or filling it in. So once you have that idea, you can just go ahead and change these things. And actually, as I'm doing that, I can pull up the palette that I had before, if I still have it. Yes, there it is, in case that I might want to use them. But the color picker is just as a quick of a way to do it as well. So I think I'll go with the diagonal part first. Just do this. And about halfway, I think that's when we can start moving diagonally. And do this instead. You might notice that it's not perfectly a staircase sort of shape, and neither is it too out of hand with the patterns, and that's okay. You don't need to be precise when you are doing this, because as long as it looks right to you, then it would probably not be that much of a big deal for whoever is playing it. So that's why the sizes and the arc is the most important when it comes to making this, because the rest of the pixels are really just approximations that give the illusion of a 3D object, really. So what I'm trying to do now is just copy whatever pattern that I see here. And you can say, all right, I have 1, 2, 3 pixels here and a fourth one there. And sometimes it could work, but if you do it like this, for example, it's not really the same shape, but it might give the impression that it is the same hand because of first of all the size and the way that you would perceive it to be placed over the coat itself. So once you have that done, you can go ahead and add the arm. So it's probably this color, and keep track of, oh, just deleted that, oh well. Keep track of whichever ones, how many pixels there are in each of the pieces that you have that are part of the character. So again, these are 4 here and 1 there. If you just make 4 and then 1, it might end up looking like this, which might seem a little unnatural, but so then you might have to guess your way through and just make something that would look a little closer to whatever you would have. You could try making it diagonally, but then again, it doesn't really look like a hand anymore. So then I guess what I'll do is just have this and then take the shaded color of the thumb and add it here in a sort of 90-degree way. And this can carry over into the next frame. by just doing the same thing, except this time you don't really need to worry about the diagonal parts of it. You can just go in and do this. Do the perpendicular one that I talked about before. So yeah, just this, and then finishing up the hand really quickly. Oh, and another thing that would be useful for this kind of thing are the onion layers. So if we erase this one just now, it usually helps you see clearer wherever you had your previous parts. So you can see the hand here from the next one, and so on. And I'll just use that as a reference for the shape of the outer parts of the hand. So take the colors from here and add them over here. So there we go. Now this is a beginning of maybe a smoother pixel hand moving part. So then when you replay this, oh, is this in the wrong order? I think we have way too many frames now. One, two. Did I just draw over the thing I had before? Well, I guess I did. But you've seen the point anyways, and I'll just move on to the second part, and I won't save those changes. The second part of the angle, because I think it's something that might be a little harder to achieve. So when you have the character sideways, it's usually easy to see where the arc is and how it's supposed to move, but when it's right in front of you, especially with this angle, transposing something that is a 3D movement into 2D might be a little difficult to picture. So what I've done is just created a little shape here in good old Blender that may look quite familiar now since the 3D workshop that we had with Amadeus. So here we are again. Let's pretend this is an arm. And I'll just snap to a grid, and I think I'll just use one arc to show you. So this is what it would look like sideways, this is what I've just done, and this is the arc that I've been talking about. And now if we just place it as it was before, there we go. When I'm moving in the other direction, you can see that everything, whatever it's doing, the arc that we've seen before, now that it's sideways, really just translates into moving up and down. Or 360, I guess, whatever the program wants to do. And this is the sort of thing that we would like to emulate in pixel art again. And one thing you might notice is the reason why we see that the angle is changing is also because of the square itself and how that looks. And the same principle that we've had before with the square, the head square, is pretty much applied for this one as well. So whenever it moves up slightly, you can see that this part, the top part, which is the lighter version right now, is much bigger than, or almost halfway this time, than what the angle of the darker part, and now it's bigger than it is, yeah. Alright, so that was just a small illustration using Blender. And let's just do this before we move on to the second part, into this character right here. And maybe we can actually complete the cycle this time round. So I think the first thing that I'll do is not add a bunch of new frames, but just start here on the second one and make this hand move pretty much backwards. So that would just mean erasing everything, and it might look a little weird right now, whatever I'm doing. But the illusion itself is given when you have all the frames together. So there. You don't really need this hand here because we can just say that it has gone off of the view, out of view. Alright, and now that we have this one, we can add an in-between frame, and I'll just move this one up since we have it. And erase this part over here. And now I'll turn on the onion layers, and you can see the difference now. And all I'm going to do is just pick an in-between point and add this color, let's say right about here. And now, since this is just a 4x4 square, we can say an in-between version of that would just consist of 2 squares over here, 2 pixels. So then when you see it move, it looks like this. And we can have the same thing be going on in the next part. So what I'll do is just copy this, or actually I'll copy this one, so that we can keep the swing going and moving forward this time instead of backwards. And you don't need to repeat this process. All you can do is take the rectangle selection here and select whatever hand you desire and paste it into, oh, did I just delete that? There we go. And paste it into the next part after the hand goes back into its neutral position. Let's say here, and keep that one as an in-between frame. So just select this and delete it first, and then paste this one. There we go. And just checking that this is the right one. Okay, so this is an in-between frame. This has to go up here, and this is the one that we want, the furthest one that it goes. We want to paste into, if I stop deleting stuff, paste into the last part that we might need. So down, forward. Oh, alright, so I guess the reason why this wouldn't work is because we would just see it go down again. So if we were to move it up, I would say it needs a different angle. So let's keep the positions, and I'll keep this one as well. So I'll just paste it up here. And now what I'll do is just make the hand appear in the foreground instead of pretending that it disappears. So we could add a new part here and add the skin color here. And then do the same for this part. So instead of that, we could have these parts go down. And erase whatever we have here. And make this go up. So you would have this going on. I'll probably add just one here maybe. And there we go. I think I'll still add this part again, just to keep it a little more consistent. So then you would have this. Yep. There we go. And now we actually have a full arc. And we can see it move right here. So yeah, that is what makes the illusion of something moving forward and backwards, how that works in a pixel environment. And the same thing could be done on the legs as well. So let's pretend that we have finished this entire character, both of the arms are swinging, these legs are fixed as well. And what we can do, or actually let's fix one of the legs as well, because it's pretty much the same concept, but it might be a little harder to picture with the boots being so big. So if we keep this one here and say, let's move this one down. So we're pretty much copying by this time whatever we've done to the arm, let's just repeat it again. This part here is where the knee is supposed to be. So whatever we're doing now, we are keeping this knee the same. So this isn't actually the right way of doing it, because whatever the impression that you are giving is more of a leg raise, because the perspective here doesn't change at all. The boot stays the same. It's just the knee that goes higher. So this is actually what we can say a pretty good leg raise, but not really a leg movement in the way that the arm is swinging right now. So what we can do is just start by cutting this in between frame here. I mean, whatever is in between the boot and the leg. And we can leave the other one for reference for the boots. So then we can just go ahead and copy that here. There we go. And we can count. If we have 3 bits here, then let's have 2 bits here. And if we have 2 here, let's have 1 here. And the way that this looks a little sideways here, we could just add a little more, and then maybe the change would be a little more dramatic onto the next part. We could also just cut this out a little bit, and we could add a new color to show depth a little bit. So let's just leave it like this for now and move on to the next part. And I think we need to fix this leg. So as I said before, this looks more like a leg raise. So I think I'm just going to take whatever we have on that side, this one right here, and again just box select to copy it. Oh, that makes a square, by the way. There we go. We box select and we copy this just to get the knee. There we go. The rest we can fill in ourselves. So let's just do that. There we go. So now that we have reached this point, we can just completely... Oh, this part is supposed to be here. It's good to have everything else that is static consistent whenever you are doing this, so that's why I keep referring back and forth to this. So for the most extreme angle that we're going to have here, we're just going to keep the innermost layer here. So this is what it should look like. We can have the onion layers on as well, just to check. And now we can bring this foot all the way up with this color right here. And we might also want to change add just like one more here to make sure that this part sort of wraps around his leg, or gives the impression that it does. And then, yeah, that should be it. So when you look at it by itself, it doesn't look right unless it is played with the whole thing. So let's hope that it does look right when we play it. Let's see. yeah, I would say that's better than it was before. So now we just need to make it go down. So if it goes backwards, we need it to go forwards now. So this one would stay the same. So I'll just copy the leg from that one. And with this, I would try and complete just the right arm and right leg sequence so that we have covered everything that you need to make a walking cycle. And the reason why I chose a walking cycle is because I find it to be one of the most common things that you have to do for a character in a game, and also one of the most complicated things, especially when we're going to go into 2D animation outside of pixel art. So this part here, an in-between frame in animation terms is also usually just referred to as a tween, which is a good shorthand term to know. Oh yeah, and this foot here, it doesn't really look right, but let's just ignore it. So then now I guess we would want it to go back into this, but before it does, let's just change the angle of this, just the boot, I would say, the boot. So then let's say it goes up a bit, and this part would stay a little bit the same. And we just move up these pixels here just a little bit. And erase this part here. And now we can go with a darker color. Not too dark, just enough to give the impression that the foot is going up a little bit. There. And then it goes down. So that should give the impression that it goes up and down. So then when we play, it should look like that. Now I've used the right arm and the right leg to show you this because we are comparing it to what it was like before. But usually whenever you're doing your walking cycle, you would rather have the right arm to swing, or the screen right arm, I'm referring to it, the character's left arm, and then the left leg to move as well. So then it would be opposites, right and left. And that would make it much more natural than it is at this point. So anyhow, once you are done, you can just go ahead and save it as I have shown you before as a sprite sheet. You can change the layout options, but usually I just leave it as it is and down those. And this is all you really need to just send it over. And you may have noticed that I have only kept 6 parts, and that's really all you need for a walking cycle. Because the main parts of it, which usually in animation terms is called blocking, is really everything you need for this to move, and it's not something that you would need to go too much into detail with, especially during the time constraints of a game jam. So you would notice that if we go back to see, we have this start position, the end position, and then the part in between. And the same thing when it goes sideways, you have the in-between frame, and this is the most extreme position, and then again the basic one, which would be the end. So yeah, that is Piskel. And one last thing that I would like to show is, I think, a pretty cool one, a pretty cool effect that I didn't know about before until someone else has done it. So what you can do is import things, and this automatically pixelates something for you to sort of fit with the theme. So yeah, let's import something from the picture that I have saved here, this duck. And let's divide by 10. These are the original pixel, this is the original pixel size that it has. And then if we import this, yep, it's automatically pixelated, and you can make it as pixelated as you want to, and that would be how you would do that. And I think it's a cool little thing that you can use for several things, and especially for images that either you took or are free to use. So yeah, one last tip that I'd give about using Piskel is sticking to 32 by 32 if the things that you are doing are pretty simple. If there are things that are quite curved and you need more details for it, then you would probably want a 64 by 64, and anything larger than that would mean that you are doing some really detailed work. So I wouldn't recommend making a style that requires that many pixels for in the context of a game jam. And that is all of it in terms of the art. Oh, actually, one last really cool thing about Piskel when you're doing sprites is that these sorts of tiles are something that you are going to be required to do pretty much on anything that is grid based. So then if we go into here and let's say preferences, you can select a mode here called tile mode. And what this allows you to do is see how the tile itself would continue forward, like on the right side, left side, up and down. So this would really help you to see how you would continue it. It's just a really useful guide to create this sort of models. So in terms of a brick model here, just sticking to 3 colors would be good. One light shade, dark shade, and an in-between one that would give it a little more of a 3D effect. So yeah, those are all of the cool things that you can do with Piskel. And now I will be moving on to 2D art in Autodesk. Oh, there's the little ghost again. Let's save the ghost, why not? So now I'd like to introduce you to Sketchbook. There are several other software that you can use for digital art that is free. So there's the app called GIMP or Krita, and you might have seen other people that may be using those. I like to use this one because of the user interface, and I find it quite easy to spot all of the things that you need, and there are also several useful tools that would help you create nicer, smoother animation, especially in perspectives. It helps you a lot with figuring out the details of it that usually when you are drawing traditionally you wouldn't really have. But the main reason why I choose to use it is because it has this option here where you can create a flip book. And I will show you later on how you can create something that is pretty much an animation. This is really a 2D hand-drawn traditional animation software. However, it also allows you to export things that would sort of substitute for this kind of sprite sheet that you have seen in pixel art, except this time for art that you are doing with the paintbrush, which really, this canvas itself is just a lot of pixels, which gives you the impression of more texture, smooth lines, and all of that. So I'm just going to go ahead and hide this layer and add a new one and give you a little bit of a tour of whatever we have here. So this part here is the toolbar where you have the undo, redo button. This is what you would usually use to move. So move, zoom, and rotate the canvas itself. This here, I think, is what you can get to select something. So if we have an artwork like this, you can select it, and then whatever you are drawing would just remain in that box. So that's a useful thing to have. Cropping the canvas, selecting things, and then you have this option here where you can move it around, or you can squash it either vertically or horizontally, using the same option over here, rotating it, and scaling it up and down. So that's really useful to do as well. Another thing is perspective. For perspective uses is this tool here and another one over here that I'm going to go more in depth with when I'm going to show you just a little demo of how you can make something really imagine a 3D space within a 2D context. What I have over here is the brush library. Now the one that I have is sort of an amalgamation of the brushes that I use the most. What you would usually end up with when you get this program is just the basic tools, and there are just about like 12 of them. Then some of them you can add around, you can switch the brushes from the brush groups, and you can also download them for free once you have the software. Now you need an account for Autodesk in order to get it past the 7-day trial, but other than that, everything is free, so the account itself is free as well. So I left a link in the description both to the Piscale website and to the Autodesk Sketchbook website as well, in case you would like to use the same programs that I use. So yeah, that's all that all the basics of this program over here. One thing you may have noticed is that I have switched to a tablet. This is a Wacom Intuos Pro. Anything else that you would use really would work. If you're an artist and you already have experience in digital art, you probably already have one. But if you don't, it's all right. And you can do pretty much the same things, except it might be a little harder with the mouse itself. Maybe you're a mouse expert and you can just do it without a tablet. That could also work. But that's why pixel art is really recommended, because if you don't have a tablet, pixel art could look really good just doing it with the mouse, as I have done. So yeah, let's say that we would like to make a room. We can use this over here, which gives you, it's a sort of perspective helper, a perspective guide that helps you make, draw lines in line with whatever perspective you are using. So anything that you are doing would be restricted to a specific point on this graph. So then you can very easily just do this by drawing lines wherever you are from whatever point you have chosen to have. So a one-point perspective is something that you might be using the most out of all of these. And you have other options such as two-point perspective. So if I do this, this would be something that maybe you can imagine little buildings with, especially if you want to make, be a little daring and make a little light novel sort of game for your game jam. Then this would be useful to just make quick backgrounds with, and maybe add some windows and say, hey, these are some buildings. And maybe there's a road and all of that. But now I'm just going to stick to whatever perspective we have going on here. You don't really need to create this graph every single time. You can just choose it and say, I want, actually I don't want this over here. That's a mirror tool, by the way. It just copies whatever I have on both sides. So yeah, I'll do this, I'll erase this, and start again. So let's say I just want to have the corner of a room. Then you can just use this tool. Oh, let's undo that. You can just use this tool to create the parts of the room that you would like to have instead. It's a little bit finicky sometimes when you don't really do the parts that you don't really pick, it doesn't pick the line that you want. So you just need to be careful that you're going into the right direction. So again, oh, it's being a little bothersome right now. There we go. And there. How about we just use the eraser tool to just get rid of that? There we go. And go back into whatever tool we have been using and finishing it off like that. So that's the basics of a room. You can color it in with whatever filter or anything else that you would have. And yeah, that would be the basics of creating a room. Now, adding things to this room would consist of just following one general rule. So, by the way, if you want to create safe colors to create a sort of palette in the way that you've done in Piscale, this is what you would usually use. And this is how I save certain colors that I would use for illustrations and all of that. And this is where the color picker is located, and I'm just going to use whatever color I've used right now and show you how just a simple thing that you could use to create a little door here. So over here you have several shapes. I'm just going to use the line shape right now to just make straight lines. And one thing that that's important to consider is making sure that whatever line you are creating is parallel to, there we go, to whatever other lines you have created here. Oh, did I? It's being a little weird. Usually this doesn't happen. If you click back, it actually undoes whatever you need to undo. There we go. Let's just do that instead. There we go. So then this over here would probably mean the opposite. Oh, again. This would mean just going in the opposite direction of this part here, and if you are a little confused in which side it should go, you can just create this graph, this grid as well, and do that instead. And you know what? I think I will continue this with a new document because it has just decided to go crazy for us right here. So how about we create a new one here. And let's just quickly do whatever we've done so far, just redo it once again. And hopefully this time whenever you try and erase something, it would actually do it for you. So this is the room. Yep, it actually erases stuff now. Yay. There we go. So the door, this is opposite to whatever you have, and this one is parallel again. And yeah, the rest of the things that would constitute making this room is again either being parallel to whatever you're doing or just having a mirrored version of it. You could use the mirror tool as well. So if you retrace this one, it would sort of retrace it for you in the angle that you would need it up here, and you can just have it do that horizontally. So let's say I want this here, it would sort of show you where it's supposed to be. So that is a helpful tool. Now I want to show you, so this is for backgrounds, if you want to have backgrounds like this, which are angled and quite hard to do in a 2D environment. And if you just have objects that you would like to place, so again, if it's a platformer, for example, you usually just stick to a sideways sort of look. So everything, whatever you present, it's always going to be facing you. So if you would want a bookshelf or something, it would be facing the camera. And actually, let's just make a little bookshelf because because it's like a square shape, and it demonstrates a difference to whatever we have been implementing when drawing a pixelated head, for example, and using that rule of how far along is the other line of the square to give the impression that it's a certain angle in that square. So whatever we had in the Blender software. Because it gets a little different when you are making something like a bookshelf. So let's do that. And also another thing is that if you choose to make an outline in your game, and then that would be a style that you might want to keep throughout everything that you make. So if you make a bookshelf using an outline, keep the outline. If you don't, then let's say, I just start with a square that is brown, maybe. maybe lighter brown. Then I would probably not use an outline for anything else that I'm creating. So then what you would use to generate the impression of depth is just darker colors. And the fill tool is just a quick way of finishing that up. Now you might notice that if you use a fill tool now to just create this square and try and apply it, oh, well, it works. But if it doesn't work, usually you just go and make a new layer, and once you do that separately, you can just join it through. Alright, let's just make some looks really quickly. So yeah, I'm just going to use rectangles to show several books that we have. Let's say we have a bunch of them like this in different colors. And again, you can see, for example, this one, some of them choose not to work, so what you can do is just make the same thing except in a separate layer. So there we go. And you can just, maybe we can also just copy paste one of them. We can duplicate them. So these options here, you can merge below, merge all of them, rename them, delete them, add a new one, or just duplicate them. So if we do that, we can just move them here with this moving tool that I have shown before, and make a bunch of them have different positions here. Okay, maybe I'll put some down here. And maybe one diagonally like this. There we go. Really simple bookshelf. Now, if we would want to make a sort of top-down perspective, but not quite bird's eye view, so if you want something in between, then the rule that we have applied before, right now I'm grouping the layers by just adding a new folder here and doing that. Yes. And you can change the transparency from over here. This is the layers tab that you would have to use for that. So let's say we want the same object but in a different perspective. We can start off by using the same sort of concept of how big is this top square going to be. That would sort of generate the impression of how much the angle is going to be for the game itself, so what perspective the game is in. Let's say that this is the perspective that we are choosing. So now what is going to be different is that these parts here, they don't really remain a square. So when we had the head last time, then let's say this over here is a smoothing stroke tool. So let's make a circle with it. And let's duplicate that circle by selecting it, copying, and I would paste it in a separate layer here. And I would paste it again in the same part here. And just leave it as one layer. So if you have the same shape and you have a character, then if you put the eyes, the nose, and the mouth, whoa. Okay. The eyes, the nose, the mouth, like this. It would look front facing. But if you move it down, but while keeping the same shape, then it would give you the impression that, and then if you move the ears up like this, that the character is now looking down, even though the shape is the same. This doesn't really go for objects that are not humanoid, so what you would do then in that case is just, first of all, establish how angled the object is, and then you go ahead and sort of reduce the size of that object like this. And the way that you would do that, you can always use the square tool to make sure that your lines are horizontal all the time, or you could use this tool right here, where it is a ruler that maintains its angle, which you can see controlled at the bottom of the screen whenever I touch it. And we can go up here and say, okay, this is going to be where I want my bookshelf to end. And we can use the mirror tool now and this time vertically to add these parts here. And actually, let's do that with a straight line, just like this. And we can also straighten this line over here, like this. There we go. So yeah, the reason why I'm focusing on perspectives a lot is, as I said, something that is quite crucial, especially when you are creating an entire environment for a specific game. So now everything else that you have, so the colors that the books were before, this is going to change as well. Oh, we've forgotten the shape here that you need for the shelf. This would remain a rectangle, so there we go. And maybe we would want to use this color to just indicate that there is a separation here, just like that. And now we can add our books. So whatever color we had before, this time, let's say you would probably see, actually let's do it on a separate layer. There we go. You would see the pages of the books. So let's say it looks like that. And we use this over here to do that. And then the spine of the book itself should probably be a different color. We could go lighter, we could go darker. I've chosen to go lighter. Although it really depends on how the lighting looks within the game, which is another thing that you need to keep track of as a 2D artist. How is the lighting going to work in the game? Because that is something that the programmers would probably add within Unity or whatever platform they are working with. So you need to be aware of how your drawings would be either modified by them or how you would need to keep track of the lighting and the colors that you are using for the game itself. For example, if you know that the game is going to be at night, then probably using darker colors would be a better choice. So yeah, that would be the shape of the book, which we would now copy and paste wherever we want. So yeah, that's the basics of creating an object that is, there we go. We could also squish it and stretch it or do whatever with it. And rotate it. Although if you rotate, you would have to draw more of it. So let's just keep it like this. There we go. And that's how you would change the bookshelves. Oh, and I've noticed here, this rectangle is probably better off like this. And these are perspective mistakes that might be quite difficult to spot if you are the one drawing, and you might need a second person to just confirm it for you. So play around with that as well. Or you could just use real life references for that. So yeah, that has been bookshelves. Now I'm going to go on and continue with creating an animation of a character that you might probably recognize. And it's one that my mod would definitely recognize, since it's a game that I've been talking about for a while now. So I'm going to use this textured brush tool and just quickly show you how I would go about doing that. So the thing that might have changed here when you have entered into flipbook mode is that you have the timeline here that has been added, and the layers now look very different. They are separated into the foreground, the midground, and the background color. So the first thing I would like to do is set up my background reference points. So I think that's a pretty dark color. There we go. So anything that goes into the background will remain in the background for every single frame that you're animating. So I actually want that to happen because this is something that I'll be using as a reference. So I'm just going to go and do this and this right here. I'm just creating two squares here, or rectangles rather, because the character that I'm about to draw, I would like them to be in the center of the piece, and this is the square that I'm going to use for the size of it, while the other one I'm going to use for the squash and stretch rule of animation. And you might have, if you're familiar with animation, it's something that really gives life and weight to whatever you are making move. So if you have, for example, a ball that is going down, so let's actually do that. This is the place where you can see the onion layers that we have had before in the previous one, in Pisco as well. So if we do that, then let's say we wanted to, okay, let's just add quite a few of these. And we can actually keep the same shape of the ball by just doing that and duplicating it. This is the duplicate keyframe button. And I think that's enough frames for that. And we can just make it move. And once it gets to the end of it, then maybe we would want to stretch it a little bit and go like that. So then when it approaches this part here, you would squash it to give the impression that it has landed. And then to make it bounce off again, you just stretch it, except in the opposite direction. So you go down and up on this side. So I'll use this tool here to do the same thing. Go up and that way. And before I play it, I'm going to add an empty frame in between, because the rate at which the playback speed, or the rate at which the frames are shown, is quite fast in this case. So then it would be like that. Alright, let's get right into animating this character. The first thing that is important when animating is realizing which parts are going to stay the same, which parts are going to move, and making sure to think ahead by duplicating the frames in which the parts that stay the same are going to be kept the same. So this part right here, all of these parts are going to be kept the same. You might already recognize whoever this character is. The little guy from Among Us. I even have it in the toolbar here. So there we go. And now, since all of these are going to stay the same, I'm just going to duplicate this a bunch. Just 8 would be fine. Okay. And since we have drawn this in the foreground, what we can do now is draw the rest in the midground, so that we can have it on a separate layer. And I think we can start off with the feet in a neutral position, so if the character is not moving. So just like that. Or actually, it's better to even out the shape of the legs, especially in characters like this where it is pretty much a sideways perspective, and the character is a pretty simple one. So we do this. Okay. Now the next part is going to be the right foot, screen right, moving forward. So we can do the in-between frame first, which is actually what we might use for both feet. So it's probably going to look like this. And then the most extreme form of this movement, which is going to be like this. Alright, there we go. So then let's add this frame as the next part. So there, and then it moves back. And then we have the extreme frame of the other foot going forward. And that would look like this. There we go. Alright, now that we have everything, we can just copy this again and place it here. And this we can actually leave on the other side because I would like to show you how this character looks like when it is moving. So really all we have here is just 4 frames. And if we add about, let's say 4 in between to lower the speed at which we can view this, 3, 4, and let's say 5. Changing this toolbar changes how many frames you can see. So let's say there. And we can play it and we can see it looks like this. And what you might notice is that there is some of the weight that is missing, and the things that I have incorporated before with the bouncing ball, so the stretch part of it, the stretch and squash, this is what we're going to incorporate with this character here. So all we're going to do is take the parts that have remained the same and squash this down all the way here. And we can copy this squash position and paste it in the other. Oh, actually, I think it needs to, so whenever something gets squashed, that is usually when it hits the ground. So that is why it's better to do it in an in-between frame instead of the extreme frames here. So let's just do that again. There. And copy this. Whoa. Maybe not paste it right here. We can actually just copy the frame since it's the same one. And place it here. Are they okay? Yep, and now it looks like this. So now it looks like it has a bit more of a bounce to it, more lively. Alright, so now what we can do is go ahead and color all this, because this is really what would make it look much closer to the actual characters in the game. So we can pick a color, and let's say, why not pink again? The ghost was pink. So, oh, and before you start coloring, you must make sure that whatever you have in the midground now would have to move up to the foreground, because this would be where you would have to keep your line art. So Anything that is line art, you just move up. Which is why, especially for things that are duplicated, it's good to keep in mind what you're going to do next, what your next step is when you are animating. And just these movements here, these 4 frames, are really all you need to give the impression of movement. And if you have time, that is when you can add more to it. So then, now that we have this, what we can do is, just choose the color again. Oh, we already have it. Nice. And go into the midground and color it in. And another thing that is quite important when you are doing 2D art in the context of the game is that characters are not the only thing that you would have to draw. There are several things such as buttons and options and tools and anything that is in the background, objects and things. All of that is going to be your job to create, because really everything that is recognizable in the game, the entire look, is up to the artist. And the skeleton of the game, which is really what makes the game a game and what makes it move, that is all up to the programmer. So both of you have really important jobs, which is why it's important to stick to it and create all of the wonderful things that your game would need. So yeah, we just finish up these colorings here. I really like the end result once everything is colored, especially once you give it the shading that it needs. So there we go. And if there are any questions in the chat, now is the time to ask. Another thing that I would like to cover is why an artist would be compelled to join a game development group. And actually, in game development, it's really a place where all of the several disciplines really come together. So it's also an opportunity for those that might already be comfortable in things such as art, either in Blender or 2D art, as I'm doing now, or any other things, programming or anything else. It's a good place where you can, all of these different disciplines can work together to create something all at once, and all of the parts are really important. So then, and music as well. What I wanted to say is that for you as a teammate, it is also an opportunity to try out all of the other different things. So you don't need to be rigid and stick to one thing that you need to do. And for example, if you are already good at programming, then these little skills from music or creating 3D art or 2D art are really a nice thing that you could try and implement, especially for those that would try out and make something independently. Although really it's recommended for you to pair up and try something new as a team together, maybe with people that you haven't even met just prior to the game jam itself. So in the team up section of our Discord, you can talk to new people and see which group you would like to belong to. Alright, now that we have the plats done, what I'm going to do now is choose a color for the shade. And now in the way that we see the colors organized here, rather than darkening it in the grays or in the blacks, what I would first like to do is just change the tone a little bit, so making it a little purple, and then going down this way rather than this way, because it changes the saturation. And maybe we don't really want it extremely saturated either, or really black, so somewhere in between. There, I think that's nice. If you keep it at the same level of lightness and you just change the hue, what might happen is that it just looks like you have changed the color but not really created a shadow in its place. So there we go. Let's use this one. And now I am just imitating one fell swoop of a shade that we have here. When you are designing characters for a game that you are doing in the game jam, it's a good idea to keep them simple. However, if they are a little more complicated than just being a blob with legs, like this, then what you might do is make the shading a little more complicated as well. But this is just everything you need, and as for highlights, you just choose the white and keep it here for the helmet or the glass side of the spacesuit and leave it at that. Another thing that you might want to do is keep this shine the same, so you can just copy paste this one into wherever you might need it. There. And then for this one, it's the same thing, so we don't need to redo it, we just place this one here, right over it. There we go. And place it on frame 12. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Seems that we've done 5 frames here. So let's stretch it to 24. Just like this. Alright, let's finish this off. So let's do this one here. And again, you can use these onion skin layers. But when it comes to shading, then usually just you can't really see what shading you have had before if you fill it in, so that's another thing to keep in mind. Let's just choose this color and doing this. And once again, we are filling in the entire thing. Once this is going to be done, the way that you are going to export this really depends on what you are going to need for the game itself. So if it's going to be something similar to whatever sprite sheet we had when working with pixel art, then a PNG sequence is the way to go. And if you want to see how your animation is played, then you would probably need... Oh. Why did the shading disappear? There we go. Then you would probably need to export it as an MP4. So, last one until we finish. Another thing about keeping characters simple is that they can also be, while they are simple, they can also be very recognizable and visually appealing. So even for a popular game such as Among Us, just a simple art style might be the way to go. And you might recognize, as I'm shading this now and just finishing it off, that shading changes a lot when it comes to depth and perception when you are making 2D art. So aside from perspective, shading is the second most important thing to keep in mind when you are creating your game. And just to top it all off, let's put the little shiny thing onto the last frame of the helmet. There we go, and I think I deleted it from that part, so let's put it back. There. So that's the character finished, and that's the walking cycle done. And to finish off the neutral position, you would just have to do the same thing, coloring it in and finishing it off. So once you have this done, what I would recommend is to, yeah, first of all save it. So let's call it a walking cycle. You can remove these lines here now because you are finished with your animation. So we don't want anything to get in the way once we export. Usually this stays. So there we go. What we would want to do is maybe add a shadow in place. So you can just easily do that by, yeah, let's add this, just a simple gray. And if we add this in the background actually, then it will automatically remain for everything else. So let's do that. And color it in. Maybe we can go a little lighter. One thing about this is that it needs to be touched when the character moves, so make sure to fix it before everything else is handled. And also, if you are going to work on something, then it's a good idea to click on the frame itself, because otherwise it would get in the way. And I'm just erasing here any of the little things that have appeared. So there we go. Oh, it still has some things here. So yes, let's choose a frame, and I think it has been, the shine has been copied by accident over there, so there we go, now that is fixed. And that is your animation finished. You might choose to not have the shading because the shading might be added on separately. So if we want, we can just get rid of it again. And if we just close the eye of the background color, you now have a transparent background. So then when you are exporting this, you go to File, Export Flipbook, and choose PNG sequence. Now just before you do that, it's important that these tweens here just disappear, because they would be added into your PNG sequence if you do that. So now let's try and export. And let's call it, yeah, just Among Us Demo Walk. Once that is done, you can go down and, where is it? There it is. This is what you're going to have. So all of your frames here need to look quite the same, and if it appears as a black or white background, that doesn't quite matter. And all of these things, I wonder why that happened. Let's go back and check. It's because all of these are blank, so anything that you leave blank is going to be copied. So in order to fix that, let's say we choose this. My mod is saying that my screen is black. Do you guys still see me, or can you hear me? So this happens since I have tried to export. Okay, how about this? I'm going to close, and what do you see now? How about now? Can you see me, or can you see my screen? Okay, do you see my screen now? Nice, great. Okay. So all that I was explaining is that these empty frames here are because all of the frames that we had before were blank. So in this case, we have noticed a mistake, and we can just erase them. But otherwise, that is all that you would need to send to whoever is putting the game together. So let's select and delete all of these. Alright, and now let's see how many of us are here. I wanted to go into the Among Us game to show you the different buttons that we have over there, because I feel like it's a great example of everything that you would need. It's a great example of the type of game that you might create, and also all of the different things that you may not even notice you have to create when you start making this game at first. So what I'm going to do now is probably just create a new game and allow you guys to join. So here you go, here's the code. If you would like to join, please do. I encourage it. And if not, then I would just stay on this title screen here and show you how this game looks like. So you have this settings button here. These parts here are probably things that you might not really have to design, but the way this settings button looks, or the way that these over here looks. Oh, hello, Matt. Nice to see you. Or this speech bubble here, then these are all things that you would have to create. And if we were going game, then I would have liked to show you the mini games that they have inside, because there are several things in many of them that require you to think about how the way that the way the way in which the game is programmed requires you to draw. For example, for those that are familiar with the game, the parts where you have wirings, where you have to connect the wires, is really, you have to think, how would it look like if you were to create that yourself? Would you have to, as the wire extends, would you have to create just one long wire that would eventually come out from view? Or would it have to be several little bits of wires that would just duplicate as you extend the cord? And that is something that you might have seen, but it depends on how you create the game as well. So that is another important thing to keep in mind. And another thing that I wanted to point out about this game is the perspective that they use. Because as you noticed, and as I have created the little animation that we had before, the characters themselves are really just sideways, but the perspective is quite different. And you can even see the way that these boxes are created here, that it's sort of an angled way that I have shown you before. And the difference between this sort of map and the map that I've shown you before, so this one here, if I open it up, is that this part here, this wall seems to be angled in this direction, whereas this one here is in the opposite direction, whereas you could, in the Among Us and in many other games, the wall would probably still be on the other side that way. And then you could have things shown on what is on the other side of the wall, especially if that would help with the scope of the game, as it would in Among Us. So yeah, those are the bits and bobs that I think are great to show you or demonstrate to you for this kind, in case that you are making 2D art within a game. So I'm just going to exit this. Maybe this little Matt person here is Matthew, my mod. So I'll just say goodbye to little Bob Matt and exit. There we go. And now we are back to us. So I think that is a nice little conclusion to my stream, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. And let me know if there are any questions or things like that, and I hope you learned something new from all of the things that I have introduced in this stream. And that is it for me, and I hope you guys have a great time at the last workshop that we're going to have on Thursday, which is going to be hosted by Owen, and it's going to be an introduction to creating a game in Unity. So our game jam is upcoming really soon, Game Jam 8. So this weekend, I hope that I see as many of you there as possible. See you later. Bye bye.